So, okay, thank you so much. We have new set of panelists. We have Pastor Ken Klein. He is in North Carolina. We have Michael Rogowski, and you know him. He is in Maryland. And we have Cory Dorion, and he is in Oregon. So thank you so much for joining us this week. Just so you know, I'm very thankful for all the panelists, but this week I'm super grateful because two of these panelists this week are on the road. And so they wanted to just be here sharing with you all. So thank you so much. I appreciate you. And thank you all of you for keep joining us in our the Wesleyan Church as It Is in Heaven cohort. And so today we're going to talk about public square. How is our church engaging in kingdom action to increase ethnic and racial equality in our community? But before we start, I wanted to let you know that as I was preparing for this week and the questions, there is a suggested rephrase of this particular topic or the question, because they said kingdom action, we can expand, advance, or build the kingdom of God. It already has been built, but we can invite people into the kingdom and live out the values of the kingdom. So based on that, the new suggested rephrase is, how is our church actively engaging and embodying the values of the kingdom of God as we increase ethnic and racial equality in our community? So that's pretty much the new suggested version that we're going to have. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you if you memorize it. I can share it on the chat so you know it. But let's hear from Pastor Cory. If you don't mind sharing with us about your context and what you do and all of that.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm in Portland, Oregon. My wife and I, and at that point, my one child, moved to Portland about 5 years ago to initiate a faith community in a part of Portland, north part of the city. A faith community that primarily gathers in homes. Some would call what we do micro church. There's a lot of different kind of names for it, but and we're primarily people who live in high proximity with one another. So the majority of our community, the strong majority of our community, live within a 20-minute walk of one another. And so, so there's a lot of shared life in the neighborhood, and thinking about what God might be inviting us into in a very kind of local, hyper local way. So proximity is a really important piece of our discernment of what our shared life looks like together. So what more do you want me? I'm not sure how much to say here, but
no, that's good. And we can hear more about you later as you keep sharing. But I would love for you to let us know how the proximity went during all this COVID thing, and how your leadership was, shift, and all of the different parts that you had to do. But thank you so much, Cory, for joining us.
Yeah,
next, we're going to have Pastor Michael Rogowsky. Welcome.
Hey, good to see everybody, and glad to be together. And yes, I pastor a church, pastored the church just outside of Washington, D.C. And so if you've seen anything on the news, a lot of people in D.C. need Jesus. So we're there, and my wife and I, we have 4 children, and we planted the church a number of years ago. And man, we've just had a blast. I'll just be straight up. When we planted the church, we planted out of a awesome church in Southern Maryland that was predominantly mono-ethnic. And so we planted a predominantly mono-ethnic church. It just happened to be how we started. And we have transitioned to a multi-ethnic church. And so our church was like white bread, wonder white bread when we started. And by God's grace and some intentionality, our church is beautifully diverse. It's about 50% Black, African-American, about 40% white, and about 10% Latino, Asian, Filipino. And we're having a blast. I've made a ton of mistakes. misunderstood and been misunderstood. So I think that's where all my hair went, that and my children. So, but man, we're having a blast. I'm not home now. We're taking our oldest to college in Arizona. So I'm in a hotel conference room in Arizona. So that's where I'm at right now. But yep, good to be with everybody.
Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, I love Washington, D.C. and that area. And yes, I can attest that sometimes, it's like, yeah, a lot of people need Jesus. I mean, but
yes.
Seriously, if we come to see, in all our zip codes, that's also something that happens. But what I love about what you share is that you have made mistakes. So we have all done that, and it's great to admit it. Sometimes hurts to admit it, but also that shows our leadership is open, because we're humans and God is here to help us up. Thank you so much.
Amen.
Pastor Ken, welcome. Share with us.
Hey, welcome from the sunny, hot, humid South today. Good to see you guys. I think Monica's on, and she was on there last week. And my partner in crime here in Greensboro, North Carolina. It's a joy to be with you guys. We are in a real interesting situation in our current situation. What was not too many years ago an older, very traditional, typical looking Wesleyan church, big brick building, 4 giant white columns out front in a middle income neighborhood of Greensboro, North Carolina, is now a very high crime area, low income, very diverse. A lot of ethnicities, but just a lot of stuff. It's impacted our church. Monica pointed out a new bullet hole in the van to me not too long ago that we were observing, trying to figure out which direction that came from. And we had to get new catalytic converters put on also that got stolen off of that not too long ago. But it's changing. It's changing the look of our church. It's changing the way we do things. And so we're adjusting, we're learning, we're growing, but Monica and I and Ryan Sims, who you'll see here probably in a bit at some point in time. Ryan was there before I was as an assistant and helped lay that foundation, those footings that this new multi-ethnic. I think I follow Michael's probably percentages as far as white, Black, Asian, Latino, and also had a lot of hair when I came into it. And but we are, despite the change, despite all the losses that we've seen the last 2 years, and a lot of our ministries, a lot of our numbers, people, money, in a weird kind of strange way, it's also a season of growth. And it is fun. It's an adventure. It's just different. And so we're embracing that. I'm sure we'll be talking, all of us, a little bit about the changes and the things that we're experiencing and dealing with. But it's a privilege. Thanks, Josmar, for asking me to be a part of the team today.
Yeah, of course. I wanted the other participants to also hear from you, from what you've learned. I think I met you the first time was the Mosaics conference in Dallas, Texas. So yeah, it's been great to see, your church, all the transitions that have happened and all the changes. And yeah, it's one thing that I grabbed from what you share is that definitely this ministry keeps changing, right? I mean, like the zip codes keep changing, and then the people coming in, poverty or whatever comes after that, everything keeps changing in our ministry. When we think we've learned this, it's like, oh, we need to relearn something else because it just keeps, moving forward. And so we have to keep up with that. So thank you for sharing. We have also Ryan Sims, but he might join us a little later. He had to go to an emergency call. And so praying for him and whatever is needed there. But we have then Michael, Cory, and Ken, which is great. And so I want you to tell me, in whichever way you want to come, whoever wants to talk first, how do you see yourself and your ministry represented in the prompt that we're talking about this week, which is public square? So how do you see yourself represented in your ministry in the prompt that we're talking about today? Anyone can go. I'm going to call your name.
Thinking, Joe. process it.
Yeah.
I've been, one of the things that as I read that and I've been thinking this last couple of weeks a lot about, not just from a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-gender, we are the patchwork quilt, I think, of everything, but there's an interesting unity that's taking place within that group. I call it the remnant of what's left. I love the unity. And I think that's a little bit of part of where we're going with that today. But as I go through these uncharted waters, these territories, as we're heading into this year, Monica and I both have had to ask the question, where are we going? You know, it's kind of like we're at sea on this big vessel, everything, you know, it's ministry, it's church. But sometimes it's like, but I don't really know, you know, I don't have this great mission that we're on anymore because it all got kind of messed up. But it's interesting to see the remnant of leaders gather around you and say, I think we're okay. But we're kind of rewriting some things. We're rewriting the scorecard of what we used to look at as success in ministry efforts. It's all kind of changing. And I think what we'll see is we'll see some of those, what's changing will come to the surface today in our conversation. What's this new journey starting to look like? It just isn't the same as looking forward to a big Sunday, you know, rally, mountaintop, or a big Wednesday night, lots of people on the campus. Now it's, you know, the homeless center with washers and dryers and shower units and the food distribution programs and all that stuff starting to come out of it. So that's part of it for me.
Cory or Michael?
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit. You know, the concept of talking about public square is a little bit unique for us, as our model is not overly public compared to, I guess, the kind of traditional church models. And some of that is, you know, as we started to initiate a faith community in Portland, I'm not from Portland. I didn't grow up there. And so, and a lot of our early team, you know, I wasn't from the city. And so very, very early on, we talked a lot about wanting to become neighbors before we were a church, wanting to kind of understand the ground that we stand on and the history. And as you dig into that, you know, specifically as we talk about this conversation today, you begin to learn about a very real racist history in Oregon, that the state that I am in, when the civil rights movement is happening in the US and states are being forced to change their laws, Oregon held strong and said, well, if you don't like what's happening in your state, move to our state. So Oregon was really built up as a white utopia. And so as you begin to learn about this stuff, and I'm like, well, I love Portland. And it's like, well, yeah, because Portland was built for me. Like as a white male, like this city's awesome for me. And learning more and more about how my city is not an awesome place to live if you don't look like me and don't understand the world that I naturally do and the way I do. And so when talking about what does this look like in the public square, a lot of it has been really modeling processes of discipleship that teach our community to be listeners, to be learners, to be asking what God might be inviting us into. And that begins to like roll over into when we see these systems, these very racist systems that exist in my city and in my state, to be paying attention to these things and learning how to notice them. Because the reality is, when I got to Portland, I didn't notice any of this stuff. Like, it wasn't. I hadn't been trained to pay attention, to see it. It was like it existed behind a veil or behind a screen that was, you know, it's like I was nearsighted and it was out there, or I was farsighted and it was in here, but I just couldn't see it. And so now we, you know, and again, we could, I don't know how deep dive we want to go, but now thinking about these kinds of things is written right into our annual calendar of things we engage in with our community, our discipled community. But a lot of it is really just learning together what it is to have like a broader scope and eyes to see what's going on and seeing what God might be inviting us into as we say we worship this, you know, this God of the oppressed. This is the story that we follow Jesus, who was killed by the state, and that's an important, you know. So we've got to be paying attention and learning to pay attention what Jesus is still doing among the oppressed people in our state.
Yeah, I like the fact that you said that you had to become a neighbor first to understand, because you know, as a lot of you are being called to something, you don't know that. You don't know exactly your zip code. And of course, the zip code also then keeps changing by the people that keep arriving, whether it's by moving or people with new, I don't know, companies coming in the city, you know, so all of that changes the mosaic of your zip code, you know, so it's very important to just not have your church open for just Sunday, but how you engage with them during the week. So I'm gonna actually definitely ask you a little more questions to unpack that, because it's a different perspective for you that you have to always keep in mind if, you know, that's the reality of your city. So thank you so much, Cory. Michael.
Yeah, excuse me. I had to kind of process it a little bit, and hearing Cory and Ken just kind of jogged my memory a little bit, because when we started our church 12 years ago, I wish I was as smart as Cory, but it was just, hey, can we just get people to come? Can we just get people to come and worship and give and serve, so we could keep the lights on? And it was about a year in that someone said, "So what do you do for missions?" And that's a good question. We should do something. And so that really shifted our focus from how do we be a church, not just in the community, but for the community. And so that's something that we now actually say with regular frequency. I'm embarrassed to say that when we first started, we gave away maybe like 1% of our income away back into the community. And you know, it is what it is. And so over a process of time, and the Lord really breaking my heart for our community, is that we've really worked hard at intentional partnerships with others in the community who already have the relational integrity and momentum with the community, so that we can kind of partner with them and say, hey, we want to make a difference with you. And so that has resulted in some really healthy partnerships. We've now got some different, this is not why we do it, but some different government leaders who have recognized us locally for our work in the Latino community, also with the homeless in our community. And so that has resulted, those strategic partnerships with intentionality have said to a broader community, oh, this is not just the secret meeting of the saints at Life Point Church. They actually want to do things in the community and make a difference, which has helped break down some of the racial tension that exists in our county. And we've kind of become a little bit of a light of the place where everyone is welcome. Nobody's perfect, but your story, your ethnicity, your history is welcome here. So for us, really, it's been strategic partnerships with intentionality in the community that has helped our kind of reputation in the community become of one, oh, it's, yeah, they're doing stuff, they care, and it's not a mono-ethnic space.
Yeah, thank you for that. It definitely intentionality and partnership, you know, it's great when it goes together. But you know, intentionality takes a lot of effort, because you have to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and sometimes you don't even know what, you know, like in terms of, like, let's say what size, you know, like how do you see it, and then the way that you know how even sometimes the shoe, like if you go inward or outward, how the shoe, because it's just even that affects the walking of someone. Right. So just keeping all of those things in mind as you do your ministry. So Cory, you said that, you know, it was very much why, and you pretty much are comfortable there because you say it was meant for you. So how did you feel that your ministry, like how do you get involved in the community when you're trying to bring people that look completely different from you? Or yeah, just let's do that one first.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is like amiss with the goal of the seminar. But like it's not my goal to bring people into what I'm doing. As far as like people who look different than me, it has been our goal as a community to join people who look different than us and what they are doing. Now, the fruit of that is that our community is broader than, you know, what exists in ourselves. And I think some of that language, I mean, it can sound really like aggressive or whatever, but like we don't have a public Sunday service. It's also not the model we exist in. And so working really hard to try and get somebody who is from a different, you know, culture than we are to come into my living room and eat the food that I serve and sit, you know, it's like all of these layers become a big challenge. And so one of our strong practices has been to try and center those already doing the work, those already engaged in this work in our neighborhood and in our city, and ask how we can help and support what they are doing. For me, this is like a really like Wesleyan thought, right? This idea that of prevenient grace, that God's grace is before us. God is already working in our neighborhood and in our city. I didn't come to Portland bringing this God that they didn't know about to this godless city. Like the Holy Spirit has been active in Portland for a long time. It looks really different than it does in a lot of other places in the US. It's below the surface in our city. It doesn't express itself in these like large churches and in these really easily identifiable ways. But there's a lot of people who have been doing the good work in our city for a really, really long time. And so joining them in the work has been our practice. And again, that might shift, you know, like, I think like, and this is, I should say it is starting to shift. And we really felt like it was important to be invited by our neighborhood to be a church. And so it's beginning to shift where these places are now beginning to come to us and asking for our help with maybe things that aren't as like, doesn't have the appeal of help that the general population loves to get on board with. Unique things that they're working in, or things that maybe exist outside the scope of an organization's stated mission, but exist inside the scope of the relationships they're involved in. And they're saying, hey, this doesn't fit us and we can't use our very pointed, you know, 501c funds for this, you know, could you come in and help in this way? So it's beginning to take place in that. But again, for us, our public square is life in the neighborhood. It's not this place that we possess and we dominate and we own. We're asking people to adapt to what we're doing. Our understanding of our work in the public square is that we go out and we are hosted like in that space. It is not our space to dominate, but we are being hosted in these spaces. I don't know if that makes sense, but again, we could spend a long time unpacking our kind of model that might help that make a little bit more sense, but yeah, so I think that's a big piece of where we're shifting how we disciple people, and need to model that also in our church's behavior, that we're asking people to be learners in the community, yet the end game is bring them here so we can tell them how to behave, or we can tell them how to worship, or we can tell them, you know, whatever. I think that models something different than we're asking people to be in the community as well. So we're trying to be through and through, kind of live in this space of being hosted and seeking out what the Spirit might be doing and joining in that work and supporting that work.
Well, yeah, I think it makes sense to me. You know, the way that you explain it is good. And so the way that I can translate this is that you didn't come there, this is what we do. You know, you're wanting them to teach you, which as a leader, it already puts you in a different position, right? Because then it completely shows humility for you and for everybody that's going to be part of your church. So that is a great position to be in. And so, you know, the way that I see this is, if you wanting to come to my house to learn from me, that means, you know, I'm just putting it like that you are going to help me wash the dishes and cut the onions or the cilantro, all the ingredients, you know, like I can wait for you to make the food with me, or I can already have it for you. But then after we eat and whatever, have the conversation. You are going to help me do the dishes, dry and put them up, which is a complete different thing that when you come in, oh, is this good? And then you don't help. You know,
That's right.
It's a complete different mindset. And it definitely looks different from the person seeing it. I'm like, so why are you here? You know, so it invites others to actually go more to your church. So it's a great perspective. And so thank you for sharing that, because yesterday, like I've said with you, every morning at 8:20, our SEMA team prays. And so we were sharing, and something was said that somebody was asking for closed doors on something. And it's such a good perspective also, because in my head, you know, personally speaking, I always ask God, open the doors. But it's almost very seldom, probably almost never, that I've said, close the door, please, and show me. Because, and that to me is a different perspective that pretty much equates with what you're saying, Cory. It's a leadership shift. And so Ken and Michael, do you want to share a little bit on what Cory said before we move on?
Sure. It was funny as you guys were talking about that. I remember experiencing God years and years ago, like 20 years ago. It was a great Bible study. But something he said I've never forgotten was, stop asking God to join you in the great work that you're doing, and look to see where he's moving and move there to join him in that work. And I think we've all fallen into that trap. I know, Michael, I did the same thing, you know, just engagement in service and worship, and everybody's going to come because it's going to be so cool and great, and everybody's going to be happy. And then all of a sudden doors closed, and I didn't ask them, Josemar, to be closed. They just closed. You know, all of a sudden there's no worship team, there's no youth ministry, there's no children's ministry, there's all those doors are closing, and you have to stop and say, okay, but what do I have? And then I got introduced at, you know, almost 62 years old, that someone's introduced me to this whole need-based ministry. Start looking to see what's there and move there to join them in that work. Stop worrying about what you don't have. And so we keep talking about the change and the shifts, and I wish it just stopped shifting for a while. You know what? It just let me get used to one thing and do really good at it. But it seems like by the time I feel like we're in the groove and things are moving along, all of a sudden it changes again. So, but it's I like this need-based ministry, and it has really shaken a lot of us out of our comfort zone and pushed us out into the community to ask questions. And through that, the multicultural stuff happens. The partnerships begin to develop. I started thinking, if I want to start something new at my church, you know, I know Cory uses that faith-based community, you know, that mine's a church. I mean, it's just a big old traditional church in the middle of, you know, the city, you know, but I'm like, if I want to start something new, we create that within our people, and it's our gig, it's our deal. And all of a sudden I was introduced to saying, but what about all these people? And the lady who's running our Hope Center isn't from our church. She had a ministry. She didn't have a building. I had a building, but I didn't have a ministry. And then 6 other people joined in on this thing. And next thing you know, we're 7 agencies all working together to make a difference for these displaced people in the community. So yeah, good stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, I always I pray for pastors, and I love, and during this cohort I have seen so much how God has given you creativity and grit on doing all these things, because you might come with an idea, and then as you keep learning the people and the flavor of your city, it's like, oh, maybe we need to do this. And then you add a little fusion here, and you add. So I thank God for you, and I thank God for the creativity that he has given you to fit the people that you have been serving, and the many more that are going to come. So thank you for that. Michael, you want to share a little bit?
Yeah, I would just add on to or further encourage what's been said about finding those people who are doing the Lord's work, but maybe not under the banner of a church, and join in that. And so when we built our first building 5 years ago, we made an intentional decision to partner with an organization that ministers to the homeless community. So this past winter, for 4 consecutive weeks, our sanctuary was turned into a dormitory for the homeless in our community. So they would come in at 7 p.m., got a hot meal. We'd serve them, pray with them, and then they'd bed down for the night. And then we'd get a hot breakfast and then a sack lunch and leave at 7 a.m. and go out to their jobs or to go find jobs. And so our church community was really invited to love those that just are just like us, just have a different living arrangement. And so that really helped, and that has helped our church kind of reframe, okay, what is the purpose? What are we doing? And why are we doing it? And so we did that with another organization, and the Lord has invited us to expand our property, not for more sanctuary space, but we've purchased 2 homes. We've renovated one. We're in the process of renovating another. And we've established, in partnership with some other community organizations, a restoration house. We call it Poema Movement. Comes from the Greek word poema, where we get our English word poem, Ephesians 2:10, for we are God's workmanship and his masterpiece. And so we've established a home, a transitional living space for women to come, whatever vulnerable life situation or crisis they found themselves, to walk from brokenness to restoration. And so knowing that we were launching this, we invited some public leaders to be part of this with us, to further communicate that we were a church in the community for the community. And so that ministry is becoming their own 501c3 and just doing amazing work. So I would just encourage those that are, I feel like so often in church, we reinvent the wheel, and it's typically not as good. It's a little flat. It's a little wonky. And it's just like, why don't we join those who are already doing it? And not worry about who's getting the credit, and just let the Lord get the glory for whatever he invites us into. So I would just further encourage what both Cory and Ken have said, is find those strategic partnerships, go after it, and trust the results with the Lord.
Amen. Yeah, thank you so much for that. It's joining others. I think it comes back to humility, right? Because I'm creative. I have the great ideas. But, am I able to be, which brings us back to the topic of power that we share. Are we able to be, underneath somebody that can actually probably drive it better? What are my gifts, my talents that I can bring to that team? I actually was part of a culture conference online. A friend of mine sent me the email. I signed up. It was free online. And there's, I can share it with you when I send the email out, is you can actually, there are 6 geniuses. Let's see if I remember them all. There are like you create things, and there are discernment, and there are somebody that actually puts it into motion. So we all have 2 geniuses, and then we all are very good with that. Then we have 2 that we can improve, and there are 2 that are not good for us. So sometimes we need to figure out what we are, because as through creating the wheel, not only shows like we are better than, right? But then can slow down the process when we want to actually move it for Jesus. I mean, of course, we have to put that on God's timing. Like, God, this is what we want. But I think with joining forces, like the same, like 2 are better together when they're praying than 1. So joining others, definitely much better than that. But it reminds me of another book. Also, this Gaining by Losing is from Exponential. It's by J.D. Greer. So it says, Gaining by Losing, Why the Future Belongs to Churches That Send. And I think it's a great point. There you go, Nathan. And so I think it's a great point. Like, it's also a shift, right? Do I want people to only come to my church? Or is it okay for me to say, hey, this is a great church that probably that's better than me or that fits you better on your needs, or I'm partnering with them. So definitely this book is something that I have seen a lot, that sometimes people don't have to just be in the pew to just warm up a pew. Just send them out, also to disciple others. So thank you for that. But I have a question. So what are some, as you think of this topic today, the public square, and how is our church actively engaging and embody the values of the kingdom of God? What are some pinch points that we can have during this journey while we're trying to, increase the ethnic and equality in our community? Share from your experience.
By personality, I love to get things done. Like, I'm so sick that I will do something and then I'll add it to my to-do list and then check it off. Like, I just like to keep things moving forward. And it's probably just my own self-worth too often is tied to what I get done rather than who I am in Christ. And when all of the tragedies that were happening in our nation, that last year, that was just, we're coming to the surface, maybe more is the better way to put it. And I felt such a sense of urgency to do something. Like, we just got to do something. And so got a Zoom call together, very diverse Zoom call. And I had some people like, hey, you're a white pastor, you need to say something. And then others that were like, hey, don't say anything until you know what you're going to say and what you're going to do. And so I said, well, we need to have I feel like just some kind of a multi-ethnic gathering, get together, service, whatever. And so I convened this call of folks within our church, and everyone's grieving and hurting and confused and angry and sad, all of these emotions. And for me, in my predominantly Western mindset, very individualistic, let's just, so I just, trying to get through tokenism, microaggression, performative allyship, like all of these different things that were just coming to the surface. And so I said, we just need to have a rally. And one of our board members, African-American guy, was like, maybe we shouldn't call it a rally. And I just said, no, like, just from my own white experience, maybe rally is not a great term to do a multi-ethnic gathering focused on unity. And so I didn't even know that. And so I think some of my own misunderstandings through my own cultural, little secret, I don't tell everybody this, I've always been a white guy. So being aware of my own filter has been something that has been a pain point for me, to not even realize, okay, how do we do this? And what mistakes and what landmines am I stepping that I didn't know? Like, what do I not know that I don't know? And so we ended up having a prayer gathering, a very diverse, multi-ethnic prayer. It was just a prayer gathering outside. And when we were planning this thing, later on, actually the next morning after we had this kind of planning meeting, but the night of, one of young Black guy in the call, he said, it felt like you just kind of showed up with an agenda and you already had a plan and you just wanted us to get on board. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to come across that way. I felt the pressure of doing something, but just wanted input and wanted us to come up with it together. So what I didn't realize is that I showed up with a goal, an agenda in mind that was understood by some as, hey, join me in what I'm doing. I need you. And so I had to repent. I had to apologize and say, man, I'm so sorry. And so as we got back together, planned it, who's going to pray for what, one of our, and it wasn't just me that was misunderstood. One of our team members, actually, we had like 8 different groups of people to pray for as we interspersed worship between it. And one was one of our Black African-American team members volunteered to pray for the police. And she told me later that she said, I can't believe Pastor Michael made you pray for the police as a Black woman praying for the police. And she had to say, wait a second, I volunteered for that. And so how much misunderstanding can take place even when the goal is good. And so we had a lot of working through and a lot more conversation, a lot more listening has been something that I've been growing in. So that's a few of the pain points for me as we move towards, hey, we're having a public gathering aimed at unity across painful disunity. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's I love your secret. Thank you for sharing it with us. Because, you know, I think sometimes this is where grace comes in, right? Like we have to, yeah, I understand you're just a white guy. I'm just Latina. And also, not like in my case, Latina that wasn't even born here, you know, and came here in different immigration process that, you know, a lot of people are different. So just to remember that when we're doing something. And then, yeah, thank you for sharing those pain points. That's good. Pinch points. Cory or Pastor Ken?
Josemar, listening to what Michael was just saying, and the fact we're talking about the public square, mine's going to be just a little bit more on the private square. Because when I first came on board, I also had Santis Beatty with me, working with me at the same time. And I think that was really my springboard or launch pad to help me understand how this was going to have to happen. I felt pretty excited just because we had people of color, Latino, in Asian and African American in the service, and I was excited because I said we're a multi-ethnic church by the fact that we're in a multi-ethnic community, and this is great. It's very colorful, and it was him who basically said, "But what about your private life?" And he really challenged me. He said, "How many meals have you had in the last week with other people of color from this community?" And I said, "This week?" And he said, "Yeah, this week." And I said, "Well, I haven't had a meal with anybody of color in my community." He said, "Well, what about this month?" And I said, "Well, I don't think I have this month." And he said, "How many meals have you had with people outside of family as far as friendships and stuff this year?" And it was shocking for me to say, well, I really don't have private, fun, non-church meals with people. And that had to change a lot. And so my friends and my family became the people, the culture around me. And that was a huge step forward. And then also it just went, what about your leadership team at your church? It's still a white leadership team. Then what about your staff? And so all the way from my private life to my staff team to my leadership team, there were just a lot of big changes. And those weren't the public things, those were the private behind the scenes things. So kind of my private square story, I guess, and tagging on with the public square.
Yes, I'm gonna share a screen really quick with you sorry, Cory, before you share, because what you said, Pastor Ken, I somehow also have that in my head, probably also because I work with Santos Beatty. He was my director of multi-ethnic ministries. But I want to share this with you, and I will share this on the email that I will send you later as a follow-up. But this journal, it's called My Personal Experience Survey. It comes out of, can you see it? Can you give me a thumbs up if you see it? Okay. And so you, at the beginning of the weeks, can you see me? Can you hear me? My Zoom quit. Okay, so sorry. Okay, so on that survey, I will send you later. You do it at the beginning. So that book is 8 weeks. And so you do it on week 1. and then you mark, I have worked on teams with. So it says whites, blacks, Asians, Latinos, others. So you do all the things. Those are the categories. And so it has questions like, I have worked on teams with, I have worked for, I have managed, I have gone to lunch with, I have read books about, I have seen films. So it has several questions. And you start, marking what you have. Then on week 8, you're supposed to take it again. And it should have shifted because you're learning. 2 things. It shows you what you are around, of, and the people that you surround yourself with, your conversations. But then, which I love the tool, the only thing that I have, or not against, but I have like to warn you is, this is not just a project. This is something that you take 8 weeks, and then you take 3 months later, and then you take 6 months later. It's a constant. It's not just because you do the book. So for me, it's like, oh, okay, I'm doing the book, but because I'm so much like task oriented, I'm like, oh, I did it. But you always have to keep coming back, because that's how your private square, like Pastor Kent was saying, is going to keep moving along. So I just wanted to share this because it's a very enriching experience. It shows a lot. And, in my case, being Latina, usually people come to me, like, oh, I want to learn from you. And like I shared before, yes, I can tell you what an arepa is and how to make it, which is different from, Colombian or Ecuadorian. I can share all of that. You can keep coming to me. But now for me to go to you, can you please teach me how to make, I don't know, like I've said, mac and cheese, collard greens. Why do you like apple pie? Why do you like, what's the other one? Sweet potato one. So all of these things, and I need to not always let you come in, but always go back to you to create the relationship on the private square. But thank you, Pastor Ken. Cory.
I mute there, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, I love just this conversation about the private and the public. And I think, if I could just give voice to where this leads, is like our desire to disconnect those is showing to be very problematic in the church in so many ways. And I think, for me, just like one like small example for our community is like learning to pay attention to who is being centered in a conversation, and then learning to pay attention to those who are not being centered in the conversation. And I love, like, Jesus does this all the time. And I actually, like, I never noticed it in the Gospels until we started practicing it in our community, as the story of Jesus moving through the crowds, and there's a woman who touches him, and, like, who touched me, and the disciples are like, Jesus, there's so many people around, like, we don't have time for this, we're going this. Jesus, no, there's someone who should be centered right now in this whole thing that's going on here in this public square that's not being centered. And so he stops and he centers this woman, right? It's the paralytic by the water who's been like sitting there for years, right? And nobody will let, and it's like, well, again, like, Jesus centers this man. But then Jesus is also doing this in his private life. As we read about Jesus being friends, or being accused, we should say, of being friends with tax collectors and prostitutes. So this is not just a public display for Jesus, but it's who he is. He's doing it in his private life, and it's reported that he's now doing it also in his public life. And I think when we work through this kind of stuff in our communities, that our private communities, so our discipleship cores, these group of people we're walking with behind closed doors, as I mentioned earlier, this is a place where we need to be practicing centering people who typically are not centered. It's a place where we practice this. For our community, we primarily read books by people of color. We'll go through long seasons where we will work through liturgies where all of the written words are written by people of color, and it as a practice. So it's not this statement of like, everybody should do this all the time, like it's something to be achieved, but bringing it down to the level of like, this is something we have to practice together, so that when we're sitting at the dinner table with our family and we're having, there's things being said that are, I'm speaking more, I guess, our extended family, there's things that are being said that are harmful or racist or aren't centering the right people. We've practiced this before. It's like, well, how do you think, this person feels, or like what, did you consider this person who is sitting in the room? And this plays out then in our workplaces when somebody is being ill-treated in our workplace, but then, I think that's where the contrast begins to hit, because in these places to be speaking up and drawing attention to those people who aren't normally centered, this is the kind of stuff that gets crucified, right? And this is the story, so it's like, how do we disciple people of power, this guy, in ways that prepare us to follow the stories. You know what? Like I'm willing to be crucified to do this. I'm willing to give up the equity that's just been like handed to me, and use the power that I have in this system to center people who don't have this power. When I'm being invited to do so by those people, right? So I think too, like we could talk at length about this, but there's all of these layers that we learn to practice this stuff in our private groups behind closed doors, so that when we are engaging in the public square, we have these skills, and we've done it before. It's not new. It's like, oh, I've never paid attention to the abused. I always just you start to learn the things that you do naturally. That when there's an allocation or something, my first response years ago was like, oh, surely that person, they surely couldn't have done that, right? That man of God, and it's like, well, that's in dismissing whether the allegation, or dismissing the story, or dismissing the cultural piece. And it's like, no, well, maybe we should listen to the person speaking right now, and give more space to the person who's, to rather than taking up all this space that is handed to me culturally. So again, I think that connection between the private and the public as a discipleship thought is saying, like, not just what are we teaching, but like, how are we going about it? Is as powerful as the what, right? The how we do church, and not like in the public, but how we do church in the private parts of our church is extremely powerful.
Yeah, think about that. It's you are all here from different ethnicities, different upbringings, and so from my experience, I had to learn from this culture, from white culture and all the Black culture and all of that. I had to put myself there. Like, I know Hispanic culture, I need to surround myself. Even I only know Venezuelan culture because that's the only one that I grew up with. So I need to learn my Mexican friends, my Nicaraguan friends, El Salvador. So I need to learn that on top of African-American, white, native. I need to learn that. So now let's say I'm native, so now I need to learn Black, white, Hispanic. So it's like Asian, all of that. So wherever you are, to me, it's like, can we all learn from the other ones that we are not aware of? We need to also put ourselves where, yes, if I go to a Hispanic church, I'm going to be majority Hispanic. So how do I invite other people? And also, I think to invite others, like you were saying, Michael, that she wanted to pray for the police. And they said, how can he pray for the police? But if we keep inviting them to the table, being church to them too, understanding them and they understanding us, why do we fear you? Or how do you see us? You know what I'm saying? It's this give and take of being church. And I love also, Cory, what you said about that verse of who touched me? Like, a lot of people are touching you, Jesus. What do you mean? Like that specific person, he knew specifically what she was doing. So just doing that. So thank you. But Pastor Ken, we have a question for you. And it's from Nathan. He says, Ken, I would love to hear more about the process of how you became multiple ministries within the same building. I have been in my position now for 2 months, and it feels like this is the direction we're going. Sorry. We have the space. It looks like 3 to 4 other churches, organizations that could benefit from it. Did you enter into an intentional network?
Yeah, the network was last couple of years, it's really been part of the partnership that I was talking about, like with our new Hope Center out back. I'm the only, of all the partners, of the 7 partners, I think, I'm pretty sure I'm the only white person that's of the 7 different agencies, government agencies, ministry agencies, healthcare agencies. And so that's part of it, is just that I wanted a partnership. I put it out there that I had a building. I met with different people. I got a vision. I got a dream, you know, that God's going to use this building to help the less fortunate people of this community with showers and washers and dryers and food distribution and all that. And they said, don't do anything without checking. So anyway, they started sending people to me, and I just took my time with that and did a lot of praying. But it's difficult when you're recognized in a community as being in this building that's always been a white church. And then everybody in the community thinks of it as a white church. It takes a long time. And Jonathan Lewis, my district superintendent, he was on this just a little bit ago. People like Ryan Sims and Monica McCrae that came in and began to help. It just took a long time to change that image. Even to this day, we go in different stores and places. Monica has shared with me a bunch of times where she'll be sharing with a person at a restaurant, a waitress, and she'll say, yeah, you know, the church across from the tennis courts at Smith High School, that big church with the big white columns. And you know, she'll say, that's the church. And she said, oh, I thought that was a white church. And she said, no, it's an everything church. And so anyway, part of that, I guess the long and short is that's been a 10-year process of helping that church and that community, even though there was a lot of intentional effort. But what's speeding that up and expediting that now is this new thing of looking at need-based ministries and meeting with people, meeting with the principal across the street, and meeting and just getting out from behind that office and going out into the community and saying, my name's Ken, I work across the street from you. But how can I be a better servant and partner? What are your needs and how can we help you? Once we got out from behind the desk and once we got out of the office and stopped worrying so much about Sunday mornings, it seemed to kind of help those doors open. But it takes a lot of, there's risk with that. It can sometimes be a little messy, but I love it and it's working. So I hope that's part of and I told Nathan I'd love to have some more conversations, and we will engage with each other and have some phone calls maybe and further that. But it's been a long process. I'm glad the people there before me were visionaries, or that church would probably be in its final hospice stage right now, you know, with a handful of older white people.
Yeah, thank you about that. It's, you know, you pretty much are saying we have to be the church, not just Sunday. Mm-hmm. It also happens, you know, from Monday to Saturday, the church has to keep doing something. And I think that's where the partnering comes in, and changing your church to, you know, have people where they sleep there, and joining meals. Definitely meals is something that I've heard too that works wonders, you know. And so we have, let's see, we have about 10 minutes in this conversation. So I want you to tell me, I have 2 questions for you. Either share a few action steps that people can take in order to further their public square, private square, or an encouraging word for leaders that are trying to do this. So you pick which one, Cory, Michael, or Pastor Ken. An encouraging word or some action steps if somebody wants to start doing the public square.
One of mine, Josmar, has just been to grab the people that are still passionate. I referred to it earlier as the remnant of leaders, people that show enthusiasm and hope and passion, and it's not many. But rather than having a LBA meeting or a board meeting in our last meeting, I just said, let's just bring those people to the room. Let's just bring them to the table. And I loved that night of praying together, sharing together, and saying, let's talk about these need-based ministries. But we need to then we kind of need to say who's an engine that has a passion for that. So if it's feeding the homeless, it's going to take a person that has a true passion, that's willing to say, but I want to investigate that more. So for me, it's not saying as a lead pastor, I need to make something happen because we're dead in the water, we're losing ministries, we've lost people. It's just pulling some leaders into the room. It's having lunch with people that, you know, still have a heart and passion, and saying, let me ask you something. You know, what do you see as a potential based where we are in this ministry, this zip code, we're just where we are right now? What would you do? And those conversations usually lead to some great, this isn't a season where I'm meeting with them saying, woe to us. We've had so many losses, you know, what are we going to do? This is a season where we get together and say, God is changing some things. And I'm kind of in a weird way excited about it, but I'd love to hear from you. I'm learning and growing from that again as a senior citizen AARP card holder. I love still learning at this stage in my life, and I'm a hero maker. I love, you know, like with Monica, Monica came in and she has been the biggest blessing in my life this last couple of years, and I just love watching her run with ministries and ideas, and so anyway, we're a good team.
Thank you, Pastor Ken. That's beautiful. Michael, Cory. Oh, Michael, you're muted.
My bad. Thank you, Josmar.
Yeah.
I would just say, man, just stay with it. You know, this whole idea is the Lord's idea. You know, look at Revelation 7:9. You know, all tribes, nation, language, and tongues are worshiping the Lord Jesus. And then Jesus taught us to pray, your will be done on earth as it already is in heaven. And so this is the Lord's idea. And I think, to recognize that when people leave a mono-ethnic space and choose to engage in a multi-ethnic space, that there are sacrifices all the way around that people make to come into that space, and to recognize those sacrifices. Like, this is not a Black church, this is not a white church, it's not a Latino church, like this is, and everyone has to understand that there are sacrifices and honor those who sacrifice. I think too, to connect the private and the public, that both Ken and Cory said was, you know, as you have those meals with people who don't look like you, is to establish some relational equity. One thing that I found that was helpful for me was, as we would have those meals together, it was hey, you know what? You know, I've always been a white dude. So when I'm in the public spaces, can you just be an accountability partner for me? If I say something that maybe didn't land well or didn't come across the way that my heart is, can you just hold me accountable, or ask me, or, hey, can I ask you about that? And I found that to be really helpful, because their heart too was, hey, we want the kingdom to be manifested. And also too, I saw, I think, a question in there from Alicia. Pastor Ryan from One Church, his church is, he's, as a Black pastor, navigating the nuances of merging congregations together, a predominantly Black church, I understand, and with a predominantly white church, and how do they navigate that? And I wish he was on the call. I got to hear from him a couple of weeks ago. It was awesome. So I would definitely say reach out to Ryan Sims on there, but man, stay with it. This is the Lord's idea, and you're not alone. I think Pastor Ken said that earlier. You are not alone, and man, love it.
Hey, Michael, just to clarify something, Ryan Sims is the whitest Black guy you're ever going to meet in your life. So I don't know if he's the one to talk to or not. I'm just kidding. He tells me that stuff. He said, I'm the whitest Black guy you're ever going to meet.
He has great insight about that question, Alicia. I see it. The question says, do we have, wait, hold on, it moved. Do we have anyone attempting to diversify the Black church, partnering, unity? I think I would love if anybody else can answer this question, but I'm going to keep that question for my next panel, which is our DSs. I would love for them to say that. So, Cory.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just kind of keep on this train of thinking about your private life, and even taking it a step further back to the books we're reading and the podcasts we listen to. I think it's it's great to think about our churches and who we're having meals with and all that, but I think there's also paying attention to the labor that puts on the minority folks in our communities, is that we're asking them to take more time to teach us when there's like so many books and podcasts out there that we can pay for, or access for free, I guess, if that's how they're being offered, to learn. And so one of the things in our community we've done every year is we've encouraged seasons for the white folks in our community to only read books by BIPOC authors, listen to podcasts by BIPOC hosts, and then listen to music by BIPOC people. And then we'll come together and talk about what we're learning by inundating ourselves in that culture. So I think when we can, and that it takes it right down to that private, like I would prefer to read books by white guys. I understand what they're saying. I pick up the ideas a lot quicker, because that's the world I grew up in and live in. It's a lot harder work for me to listen to and read books by by Black women, Black female theologians who are coming at a total different experience in the church and theology. And so I have to pay attention a lot more and read slower and digest in a different way. But I think it's important to make ourselves kind of feel that discomfort as we kind of move forward and begin to lead in our communities and in our congregations. So that would be, I guess, kind of a practice that I would recommend is for a season, change the amount of information or the location, the proximity to information that you're familiar with. And I get that advice is for other like white guys out there. I have no advice for anybody other than that group of people. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's interesting all that you're saying. Yeah, definitely read and listen and all of the stuff that we put in our eyes, even from the standpoint that we agree with, just to listen to whatever else that things different from us is interesting, to digest. And definitely you read slower because you need to process and you need to reread as if you didn't understand it, because probably you didn't. And so you have to go back and yeah, I've done that too. So it's like, okay, that's a perspective that I didn't know. So thank you for that. But yeah, before we end, I wanted to send something in the chat to you all, because we didn't even go any farther with the cultural values debrief tool. And what you do as leaders, you pretty much, bring culture to your churches and to your communities. And so this is a learning tool that is really dear to my heart, because it teaches us where we are, where our cultural preferences. It doesn't mean that you're wrong or right. It just shows you what you are and the people that are around you. And culture can be taught, in your church, in your family, in your community, in the places that you are, not just in the church. So you can take it as pastors, you can take it with all the pastors. So it's like this tool can actually be used by depending on the levels that you are. If you're in leadership, if you are with your worship teams, if you are following somebody, how did you feel? So it's very much adaptable to a lot of things. So I didn't want to not talk through it, and that's why we're having a follow-up conversation in September. We have two panelists that are going to be sharing with us from their perspective, and I will be sharing a little more on how you can evaluate yourself on this tool. So the registration is there. Of course, it's free. It's pretty much a follow-up of this conversation. Different panelists, but the panelists for today can join us if you would like. And also, because this is our first time that we shared this learning cohort with you, we definitely want to hear what you think. Did you like it? Was it valuable for your time? Were your needs met? on all of that. So next week is our last week of this cohort. So I would love for you to take the little time to fill that survey, because we are wanting to do it again, but we want to do some changes based on what you have to say to us, good or bad. So I would really appreciate you if you take the time. I will send again this link and everything that I'm sharing with you today that was shared here, some books and the survey in the email. But thank you so much for joining for the 6th week together. I'm super happy that you're here with us. And so before we leave, I'm gonna pray again. So thank you so much, Cory, Pastor Cory, Pastor Michael, Pastor Ken. Thank you, Father, for being in the midst of this conversation. It's so rich. And so thank you for working the way that you're working in the community, in our hearts, in our leadership, the way that we do church, the approaches, being neighbors, being friends, inviting people to our table to eat, putting ourselves as servants, not as people that only need to be served. So thank you for that. Thank you also for the pastors, for their ministries, for the way that you give them creativity. Father, I ask you that you keep pouring into them from your love, from your wisdom, give them grace, protect them on the adventures that they're going to take for their ministries, for their lives, protect their families, keep them away from all harms, protect the panelists, the ones that were here, the ones that are here right now, the ones that just left, the ones that are hearing or will listen to this recording later. Just be with them and the journeys that they're going to take, Father, to further your kingdom on earth. So we love you. We put this time in your hands and thank you for leading us the way that you are. In your name we ask and pray all these things. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
And so thank you so much, guys, for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.